I love that I can record through Streamcast, and I'm recording on Audition, and on the Roadcaster, I can hit record to my SD card. So I got three backups.
You have backup plans. You have Chris Carson, you have Rashad Penny, and you have Carlos Hyde. And maybe you have 4 options. I don't know. You can
Maybe Alex
remember everything.
Collins.
There you go. I saw somebody yesterday, by the way, talk about how Alex Collins is better than Carlos Hyde, and I could not agree more.
I think it was Colby.
Was it?
I think
Yeah.
Colby said that. Yeah, because I said something about it was nice to see him get that touchdown at the end.
Yeah. Quicker to the
chimed in.
ball. He's just shiftier. It just, I don't know, it fits. Yeah. I'm an Alex Collins fan. I think they should try to bring him back. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen with Carson, but if you at least have Penny and you try to bring back a guy like Collins, you're probably okay.
Well, and it's funny how some of those running backs that we've churned through over the years, I was really happy to see him bring back Bo Scarborough. And I hated seeing him get hurt right away.
Yeah, he actually looked pretty good in the short stints. He really did.
I hated when we lost him to the Lions last year. I thought he was a guy that could contribute. He runs hard. He's big.
He's kind of a super poor man's Derrick Henry. Big, longer strides, not quick necessarily, but decisive. And, when he gets rolling, there's enough speed there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that was a shame. Now I'm worried about Adams. It's funny how coming out of the game on Sunday, I thought Reed looked like there's no way he's going to play. I thought that was a core injury. He's done.
Yeah. And now it looks like maybe he's going to be okay. And
and then they were like Adams, he just tweaked it or whatever, and they're playing it safe. There's no way he's going to miss a game. But the way Carroll talked today, it's the exact opposite. It sounds like so.
Right, brutal.
It sucks. It was such a fluky little hit on Adams.
Yeah, I don't feel good about Sunday, even if Adams was 100%.
I do.
I don't feel good about it, and the reason I don't feel good about it is because I don't think Goff's going to play. I think at the end of the day, Wolford's going to start, and he's going to be the difference. Did you watch the Cardinals-Rams game?
I saw the extended highlights of him.
Yeah. He was actually pretty decent, and the one thing that he can do a little bit that Goff can't is run. And that's just an element.
I just feel like my only hesitation about the game, and it's so weird that we've gotten here, I don't know if I trust the offense to score enough for us to win. But I trust the defense so much right now, and specifically how they're built to match up finally with this McVay offense, that I don't think they're going to do much more than they did in the second half down there or the full game up here, even with him. And plus, you've seen it before, it's like these guys, it's the first time anyone's seen him since the AAF, and what do you use to scout him? And now we've seen him, and we've played mobile quarterbacks and we've handled him. So
we both know that Pete Carroll's very slow, though. He's very slow to actually go, oh, this is what this guy does. Let's prepare for that. I don't know.
I feel like that's changed, though. That's where my confidence comes from. I don't know what it was, and I don't know. Just when I was ready to give up and thought they're never going to adjust. He's stubborn. He's got Mike Holmgren disease at the end of his tenure, and he just thinks what he does is going to work. So they just keep doing it over and over again. And then they went out and fixed it. And every game I see a new game plan and I see a new approach, and we're not as predictable now. And so I don't know.
I think offensively, by the way, you said you're more worried about the offense. I get it. Totally get it, because I'm there too. But I think even though maybe on paper in some ways it doesn't look like Mike Yapati is a significant upgrade over Jamarco Jones, we know that to
he is.
To a noticeable level he is.
Yeah.
And Brandon Shell at right tackle.
He's big.
Like he's had a pretty good year and a noticeable difference. And the one thing that we don't see, and that's difficult to quantify, is what are they not trying to do because they don't have their starting left guard and they don't have their starting right tackle? What are some of the things that maybe they take out to simplify things for them and to maybe make up for the fact that they're not as good at those two positions? When you have those two, your starters, you're significantly better off. Your game plan is obviously wide open. Yeah. So I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I'm not suggesting they're going to lose. I just don't feel good about it. I don't have a lot of confidence. I'm very somewhere in the middle on one side or the other. I don't think it's a good thing that they just played them 2 weeks ago. I think that's bad because I think Pete Carroll gets out coached a lot, and I'm worried about that. I'm worried about McVay and his staff making adjustments that Pete Carroll does. I'm still worried about that. Yeah. this love-hate thing with Pete Carroll, like, just about everybody else.
Oh, I
So,
100% do.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I'm either, loving him or cursing him.
yeah. But I
I
don't
I
want him to get rid of him.
I feel like though, and I know enough Rams fans that I think could back me up on this, where now that we match up physically and scheme-wise against what the Rams are good at, like, I don't think there's anywhere for McVay to go. I think his approach offensively is the kind of approach that you can sorta quote unquote "figure it out." Where as opposed to say Kyle Shanahan, where you could play him 3 times in 3 weeks and he's gonna change it up on you each time, and you don't know if he's gonna run it 60 times or he's gonna throw it 40. McVay runs those crossing routes and he does what they do, and if you can stop that, I
It
don't
does
know.
put a lot of pressure on the quarterback to be, um, more efficient. You
Yeah,
can't make mistakes when you're throwing 7-yard crossing routes. You have to nail that. You're only gonna get so many plays in a game,
yeah,
and if you're not throwing the ball down the field, as much, yeah, it almost turns into kind of the West Coast offense sort of a feel
mhm,
like you have to go 25 for 33. You can't go 24 for 41. That doesn't work. So that's the one thing. Yeah,
and and it's good that he's mobile and all, but I felt like the matchup we hands down won 2 weeks ago was our defensive front against our offensive line, and I don't think that's gonna change. This kid's gonna have to stand in there, and he's gonna have to deliver some throws. Um, even
yeah,
if even if Adams doesn't play, because they haven't been
mm,
blitzing him as much lately, he's been more
right,
in coverage,
yeah.
and I think Ryan Neal being healthy, I don't
Mm. He's
you know
okay. Yeah, he's
Yeah,
okay. What's Ryan Neal? Replacement level player at worst?
sure. Yeah.
Like, there are times where he looks better than that. So,
Yeah, right.
not Jamal Adams, but yeah.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Yeah, I'm nervous. I hate watching Seahawks games, dude.
I'm always nervous.
I hate it. I watch them every week. Sometimes I turn it off because, I'm like, maybe superstition will help us, but
Right.
I age every week. I age like 5 years every week,
Well,
dude.
it's the hardest part about being a Seahawks fan is knowing that on any given day, they can beat anyone.
Mhm.
Even though like, the Green Bay is a terrible matchup for them, but
Yeah,
they can beat Green Bay 3 times out of 10,
yeah,
and so it's just, are they gonna show up and be a complete team that day?
right,
Because they can also lose to the Giants
right.
in an important game at home
Yeah.
with Colt McCoy playing quarterback, so it's not that's what drives you crazy. Is there a 12-win team that can play like a 3-win team, but they could win the Super Bowl,
Right.
but they'd have to play 4 really complete, almost perfect games in a row to do it, and we haven't seen that
Yeah.
at
I
all.
guess what I'm kind of hoping for is that we get some upsets before Seattle. Before, like, if Seattle squeaks by the Rams, they win that game. That maybe there's some upsets along the way, to where Seattle doesn't have to play at New Orleans or they don't have to play at Green Bay. You know what I mean? Like, it's
Yeah,
wishful thinking,
for sure.
but maybe not completely out of the realm of possibility, especially the way Tampa's playing right now.
Yeah, that's
You
that's
know?
the chance.
Yeah, they're kind of
That's the
the,
chance
the
right there.
wild card of wild cards.
Yep.
Because it's Brady and they're rolling. All right. Anyway, let's go.
Alright, let's talk some baseball. Jason Churchill of prospectinsider.com for those of you, going in the Wayback Machine, and Baseball Things podcast joins me now on the Emerald City Sportscast. Thank you for being on the first episode, my friend. Good to see you again.
It is an honor. I want a poster and everything now. That I was in the first annual with some sort of a trophy, and it's literally a participation trophy. So that's what Churchill's about.
The warehouse is working hard on merch. We should be rolling it out sometime in the next fiscal year.
Sounds good. I feel
I wanna
confident.
talk I wanna talk some baseball with you. Even though before I hit record, just so that people know, we talked 20 minutes of Seahawks. Um, because even though, I'm tired of hearing people say there's nothing going on right now and it's boring and it's slow. Because my first question right out of the gate, here we are, first week of January, with a Mariners team that has spent the last 2.5 years rebuilding from the ground floor up. With where they are right now as an organization, as a major league roster, as a minor league system, isn't the fact this has kind of been a boring and quote unquote slow offseason, isn't that a good thing?
I think for Seattle it is. I think for baseball it's not. So I get when fans are like, "Come on, like let's see something. Let's get some movement on the Francisco Lindor trade front. Let's get some movement on George Springer. Let's get some movement on Trevor Bauer." I get that, and we've seen this trend the last 2, 3, 4 years over the offseason as owners try to, kind of unofficially, collude, with free agency to suppress salaries. But from a Mariners standpoint, Dan, I think you're right. I think if they're going to get an opportunity to take advantage of, ultimately a sunken market, because that's what we're looking at. We're looking at arms out there like the Jose Quintanas and the Jake Odorizzi's of the world that, in a normal year back in 2015, 2016, a 30-year-old Jake Odorizzi might get 4 years and $65 million.
Yeah.
He might have to settle for a 1-year deal this year. And when you look around the league and when you look at, kind of think about what Seattle's trying to do this offseason, trying to rebuild the bullpen, and they want to be aggressive there. They want to add an arm or two to the rotation. They've already added Chris Flexon. I think a veteran, a more established veteran, is next on their list. That's the way the Mariners are going to be able to get involved on a player like that. Otherwise, it's going to take a lot of creativity, because it's not time for the Seattle Mariners to splurge. It's not time to trade, a top talent from the farm so you can add to the 2021 team. We're a year or so away from that. So I think you're dead on. I think the market being stagnant is good for Seattle. It
Yeah.
doesn't guarantee them anything, but I do think it's good for Seattle, and it might present them some opportunities that they otherwise might not have been staring at. I think that's what Jerry Dipoto is going to be looking at here over the next month.
Well, and it didn't help that the moves that Jerry Dipoto has made this offseason, he made them all in about a 4-day period, and then there was nothing before and there's been nothing since. Maybe if he had spaced it out a little bit, it would have kind of fed the masses a little bit more. I see it as a good thing, because I think, to me, it says, and you're right, we might be having a different conversation if this team was legitimately on the verge of playoff contention and had playoff contention expectations, because then you might be more aggressive about filling a spot that you think might be weak. But I think it speaks to some of the overall talent level and some of the depth that they've built up, that there really isn't that glaring weakness. Again, we're not talking about, trying to load up and really take a legitimate shot at the playoffs. There isn't that glaring spot on the roster where you say they got to go out and fix that right now, or they have no chance to be a competitive baseball team.
Right. And I think this year, 2021, is a year where we can look at the Mariners, and this is the way I think they're looking. I think it's pretty clear that they're looking at it this way. 2019 and 2020 were pure development, create payroll flexibility years. Year 3 here, as we head into the third season, 2021, they're starting to kind of meld development with winning a little bit more. I think that's a good way. Maybe it's 50-50, maybe it's 60-40, development winning, but winning is a little bit a bigger part of it for the organization this year. But again, like you said, it's not like they're like, we have to make the playoffs. What do we need to do to make the playoffs? So what they're not going to do is go out and block Jared Kelnick.
Yeah.
They're not going to go out and block a Logan Gilbert by signing 2 or 3 starting pitchers and loading up their rotation with guys with guaranteed contracts. They're certainly not going to do that. And they're not going to go out and splurge for 1 and 2 year deals on bullpen guys, considering the volatility of that particular position. What they're trying to do is keep the flexibility open for 2022 and beyond. I think what some fans are expecting, and I get why they want it, but it seems like there's an expectation that at some point Seattle's going to go out and sign Javier Baez to a $300 million deal, or Seattle's going to go out and sign Lindor or Trevor Story or whatever it is. None of those things are happening. Like, I feel confident sitting here today and telling you that none of those things are happening. I've been saying this for a long time. I don't think those large contracts are happening in Seattle ever. I don't think they're going to in the next 10 years, unless inflation just destroys the sport, that we're going to see a $300 million contract for a player in a Mariners uniform. I don't see it. Where the payroll is going to be used is it's going to be supplemental, and it's going to be on guys that they extend, the Jared Kelnicks and Evan Whites and the Kyle Lewises of the world. And I don't just mean, hey, let's extend a guy before he gets to the big leagues. I mean, in 3 or 4 years, maybe they extend Kyle Lewis for 6 years and $140 million or something along those lines. But what they're trying to do is win a little bit more, pay attention to winning a little bit more, care about winning a little bit more, and actually win a little bit more in 2021, because it's not going to take a whole lot to get them into that race in September. You can win 80 or 82 games and maybe get into that 8 spot, because that's kind of what we're staring at for the playoff format again in 2021.
And it doesn't help when you're a casual fan sitting at home looking for hot stove league action to see what the San Diego Padres are doing because it's like they're playing fantasy baseball down there. And but what I tell people that get frustrated by that, because it's fun, like you said, is that's where the Mariners are headed towards. That's where they could, I'm not going to say should, but that's where they could be in, say, 2 years with a deep enough farm system with high-end talent that they can pick away at those, prospects between 10 and 25 on their prospect list and trade bulk in order to get big name marquee players like that if they need to fill a hole or put them over the top. They're not there yet, and I think that's the point you're trying to make. I do want to talk about the bullpen. You mentioned it, and I think at the very beginning of the offseason, this became the focus because Jerry Dipoto made it the focus. He's always been very upfront and transparent about what the organization's trying to do. And he was specifically, this is the way I want to look at it. He specifically said he thinks it's the difference between this team possibly competing for a playoff spot and not in 2021. And also that for it to help them win, they need to improve it. And he specifically said he wanted to add 3 or 4 relievers. I went back. I wanted to look at that quote again to make sure I was right and that it wasn't 2 or 3, but he said 3 or 4 relievers. And he specifically said that he wanted it to give them some certainty at the end of games. So we're not talking about flyers here, right?
Mhm.
So by my count, I count Kendall Graveman in that mix as a guy being converted into the bullpen.
Mhm.
Obviously, Rafael Montero acquired from the Rangers in trade, and then Kenyon Middleton signed as a free agent. I don't really count Will Vest, Rule 5 pick, or Robert Duger, any of those types, to be someone that gives you certainty. So that
Those are
gives
those
us
flyers
3.
you're talking about. Those are those flyers.
Right. Those are the flyers. So we've got 3 of the 3 or 4, and I'm looking at a list of, as you said, a watered down market with a ton of really solid relief pitchers. Is that where you think there's still an addition to be made?
Yeah, I think at least one more. I really do because I actually don't count Kendall Graveman in the 3 or 4. I think when Jerry Dipoto said that, he already knew Graveman was coming back and coming back as
Okay.
a reliever. He absolutely.
All
So
right.
I actually
What I
think
want to hear.
there could be 2 more, and I think one of them is going to be a relatively significant name. I do. Whether it's a Blake Treiner, it's going to be somebody we've heard of, somebody who's
Yep.
closed before. And the volatility of relievers. Guys have really good years and they have a couple of just okay years. Maybe they have the bad year and then they bounce back. Jerry is always looking for that bounce back year, and I think it's going to be a player or 2, a reliever or 2 like that. And I think Blake Treinen's right at the top of their list. It sounds like they're trying to convince him that it would be good for his career to come to Seattle because he will get opportunities to load up on saves.
That's really good to hear because he's a guy that I've obviously had at the top of my list all off season, but I hadn't seen any reports specifically connecting him to the Mariners. So you're saying that they have had those conversations?
Yeah, and everything's preliminary at this point
Sure.
because Treinen's trying to get multi-year deal. He's trying to max out the AAV, and he wants the best opportunity to win as well. So you have because free agency's it's so early, even though it's January, it's still very very early in free agency. The markets really haven't even been set in free agency. You still have guys like Treinen out there thinking, I can get the AAV I want, I can get the years I want, and I can get the team I want. When it starts to narrow down and guys start to sign, some of those opportunities start to go away, and then he has to prioritize. Do I want the AAV? Do I want the years? Or do I want the team? And how much do each of those 3 things matter? So I wouldn't bet on Treinen picking Seattle, but I'm kind of curious if they might not be a little bit more aggressive dollars-wise on that one reliever. Everybody else has been inexpensive. They haven't spent any real money. Middleton's going to make less than $1 million.
Yeah.
Montero's not expensive, and obviously that was a trade, but Montero's not going to be expensive. Graveman's pretty cheap, considering. And I think there is room, especially on a 1-year deal, for them to go out and if they want to give Treinen $8 or $9 million guaranteed, even with some incentives on top of that to allow him to get over the $10 million mark for 2021, and then they keep their flexibility, their payroll flexibility beyond 2021 when they do short-term deals, the 1-year deals like that with some relievers. So I think that's what's coming. I don't know
Yep.
that it's going to be Treinen. I wouldn't bet
Yep.
it's going to be Treinen, but they are aiming relatively high. Not Liam Hendricks high, but Blake Treinen high.
Well, and if they don't get Treinen, there's a ton of other guys out there and I'm sure knowing Jerry Dipoto as we do, that he's got a plan B, C, D, E laid out on that whiteboard in his office. that's locked away.
And I do think they're all gonna be short term too. I really do. I think Jerry believes in the 1-year deal for relievers. I'm not saying he'll never give a reliever a 2-year deal or that he wouldn't give Treinen a 2-year deal. But if
Yeah.
you look at that farm system, they're they're building. We look at some of these prospects as, ooh, he's a 4 pitch guy. He has a chance to start. This guy's built like a horse. He has a chance to start. We know that a lot of those guys are going to turn into relievers.
Yep.
And I can pencil, and I actually did it, early this morning. I penciled out what the 2023, 2024, 2025 bullpen could look like, considering the chances that some of these, second and third tier starting pitching prospects ultimately end up in the bullpen. And boy, does it look good.
Yeah.
That makes it cheap. That's very Jerry Dipoto. He's very good at building a bullpen. There are two potential kind of Edwin Diaz transitions that the Mariners can make with a couple of their young arms, not including Justin Dunn, who could also be part of that.
Right. And we're going to talk about one of those specifically here in just a second. But first, I want to touch briefly on the rotation. Jerry has said that he wanted to add a veteran arm there to stabilize it. There was a great piece that Luke Arkins did on your site about Dipoto trying to find his Charlie Liebrandt, that type. But I'm really intrigued by the Chris Flexon move. You mentioned him. He's a guy that was a former top prospect with the Mets, struggled at the major league level with them, went to Korea for a year, still just 26, 27 years old, I think. So not even really at his physical prime, but he changed some things up in his repertoire, or he changed his pitch mix and his pitch usage, had some tremendous success over there, really was lights out in the Korean League. And then they bring him back and sign him to a contract that makes it appear as if they're going to give him every chance to start. What can you tell us about Chris Flexon?
It's an interesting get, and it's really difficult to evaluate just looking at numbers when you look at the KBO, when you look at how guys perform, whether it's a hitter or a pitcher. But when you look at the stuff, it's decent stuff. And you alluded to the change in pitch usage. He started throwing the curveball more.
Yeah.
It's a high spin curveball. Started throwing it more over in the KBO, and it started working. My concern is you can't just go from the KBO and striking out a batter per inning, come over to the big leagues and continue to throw that particular curveball. It's a good curveball. It's not a great curveball, and you have to be careful with it. It'll get torched. I think we're going to see games where Chris Flexon gets absolutely torched, and he's going to have to kind of refigure out what he can do, what he can get away with at the big league level. I think he's a number 4, number 5 starter. I think ultimately on a good team, on a good pitching staff, he's your swing guy. He's the guy that Nick Margavage just was last year, that he starts when you have an injury, but makes more appearances out of the bullpen over the course of a full season. But he's interesting, and the one reason why for me that he's interesting is he's a guy who's, like you mentioned, he's kind of reinvented himself, and he's kind of remade himself. He's changed some things, so he's already made adjustments. And I think once he gets kind of smacked in the face, in spring training and then early in the regular season, I'm going to be very curious to see how he deals with that and what changes he actually makes. He's not going to blow anybody away with the fastball. The only potential plus secondary pitch is that curveball. It's an average, slightly above average slider and a below average changeup. We'll kind of see how he mixes that together again. When you're pitching to your kids in the backyard, you have tons of confidence throwing your fastball, right? But when you're throwing to adults, on the weekend, you're being a little bit more careful, and that's kind of the difference between the KBO. This isn't the Japanese leagues over there. This is the KBO, which a lot of people think is the equivalent of maybe AA or light AAA. There's quite a large difference in terms of the hitters you're facing on a regular basis. When you get beat and when you make a mistake in the KBO, the guy hits a base hit the right center field. When you make that mistake in Major League Baseball, the ball is hit out of the ballpark, and that's obviously going to be a problem.
Do you think they're still hunting for a starter as well?
I absolutely do. Again, can't guarantee they're going to get something done, but the market has given them an opportunity that they might not otherwise have had. And I think if you look at what they're looking at now, Marco Gonzalez, Yusei Kikuchi, Justice Sheffield, Chris Flexon, Justin Dunn, Nick Margavicius, and LJ Newsome. Okay. So you have 7 guys right there. You need as many starting pitchers as you can. Newsome is probably more of a swing guy long-term and for 2021. We don't know what's going to happen with Justin Dunn, and he might fit better in a bullpen role. But if this team has any aspirations to make the postseason, you're probably not – if Dunn continues to do what he did a year ago, you're probably not going to want to give him 30 starts or 28 starts in a 6-man rotation. You're probably going to want somebody else for that spot. So when you think about what they might do with a Logan Gilbert and think about what they might ultimately do with Justin Dunn in his role, they need a guy. If you threw in whoever your favorite number 3, number 4 starter free agent is, I keep mentioning the Quintanas and the Rick Porcellos and Jake Odorizzi. If you toss him in like somewhere between Marco Gonzalez and Yusei Kikuchi, or between Yusei Kikuchi and Justice Sheffield, especially if it's a right-hander, you can go Marco, Yusei Kikuchi, Jake Odorizzi, for example, Rick Porcello, and then go Sheffield, Flexon, and Dunn, and then give Dunn how many ever starts it takes to get to the point where you're thinking about calling up Logan Gilbert.
Yeah.
And then you make the decision on future role with Justin Dunn, toss him into the bullpen, send him to the minors to work on things, whatever it happens, whatever that ends up being. You're in pretty decent shape. You're going to cover innings, and that's really important. You mentioned a little bit ago when we started talking about the bullpen. Jerry Dipoto thinks that could end up being the difference between the Mariners competing for a playoff spot, getting into the playoffs, kind of getting over that line, as I like to call it, versus where they're going without improving the bullpen. But you can't have a good bullpen if your starters are only going 4 2/3. You're gonna wear your bullpen out. So you need to have some depth and you need to have some impact, but that also includes the rotation. And if they think they're done in the starting rotation, they're not actually trying to make the playoffs much at all. It's really, kind of a mirage. It's really them just kind of, pulling the curtain closed and saying one thing, but actually kind of doing another. That happens in Major League Baseball quite a bit, especially with teams in Seattle's position. And again, I don't think it's Jerry Dipoto lying, but if they call it a rotation, as is right now, their plan is not to make the playoffs. Their plan is to make sure they maintain their roster and payroll flexibility for 2022.
Is the 6-man rotation here to stay, or is it just something they're using now for development purposes?
I gotta say, I hope not. I understand its advantages during the development years. When you're developing players, what I don't like is you get into a situation. If we fast forwarded, let's say 2 years, and we're staring down the 2023 season, and you still have a veteran Marco Gonzalez who's 30, 31, still pitching well. He's kind of your de facto one right now. You hope somebody else takes over that role, whether it be Gilbert or an Emerson Hancock or somebody else that you pick up. But you have your Marco Gonzalez. Yusei Kikuchi may not be here in 2023. Justice Sheffield is a mid-rotation guy. Chris Flexon only has a 2-year deal, so who knows if he's going to be back in 2023. Justin Dunn's role probably ends up in the bullpen. They have issues there in the starting rotation. So when you start thinking about what they're trying to do with their young players and what they're trying to do with their veterans, there's got to be a way for them to kind of meld this together. And this happens to be that year. So I continue to think about just about every question you've asked me. I've thought about, here's what fans are complaining about. And I get it. And I want fans to complain. We want fans to complain because we want them to care. But from a fan standpoint, again, you can't win it. I said this the other day on my own podcast. You can't win an argument or even stay in an argument if you try to tell a fan you have to be patient. I do not use that word anymore. Not use that phrase anymore. So I will not say that. I'm not telling fans to be patient. I'm just trying to get them to understand the Mariners' perspective, the aggression that they're going to put forward. Fans are going to be disappointed when the season starts. They weren't aggressive enough. They didn't do enough. They have all this payroll space, and they're not really going to use it. So I think folks like me and you that talk to these fans and produce content for these fans on a regular basis, we're going to have to deal with that probably for another year. So
It's such a fine line because I get it. I try to be more understanding that, everybody has their own fan level and everyone has their own frustration level and they want to win now and it's hard to be patient. And so I try to let them just be frustrated and express themselves unless they're wrong. And then I have a hard time not telling them that they're wrong. Although I will say this, I do feel like there's been a shift over the last, 7, 8 months. I think through the 2020 season, you're always going to have that segment of the fan base that just wants to win right now. And anything less than a World Series championship, they should just clean house and fire the GM and the manager and everybody with it. I feel like there's more understanding among the general mass of the Mariner fan base of what's happening and that more people are seeing the positives and the direction that this rebuild's going.
It's a fragile understanding, but I agree with you. It's fragile though, because I've seen conversations take place on social media where somebody will say something and then a little bit more rational fan that's probably, a little bit closer to this and probably pays attention a little closer than the casual fan that said the original statement, that made the original statement, they'll cut in and say, yeah, they're building things, like we're seeing.
Mhm.
And so you can tell that particular, but then somebody else jumps into that thread and says, yeah, but San Diego in this position went out and got Manny Machado.
Right.
And that second person, the rational person in this conversation, at least among the first two, will take that and run. You know what? You're right. Why aren't the Mariners doing? And they don't consider the other things that are in place. I had that
Yeah.
question on the podcast the other day. Why can't the Mariners just go out and do what the Padres did? The Mariners entering 2021 are not in the same position as the Padres entering 2019. It's not the same team. It's not.
Well,
They had a lot more going for them organically, with Tatis ready to go on day one, Paddock
yeah.
ready to go on day one. They'd already signed Eric Hosmer, had a little bit of, while it wasn't necessarily performing, they had a little bit of that veteran leadership there. They had more going for them and were ready to kind of take off a little bit. Not that signing Machado was a bad idea, but that doesn't necessarily automatically make it a good idea for every team in a similar position to go out and do. That's a large contract that at some point the
Yeah.
Padres fans are going to be like, oh boy, this is a problem. They're just hoping that it pays off in a World Series before they get to that point.
Well, and I will say this, and you're right. It's colored by who you follow and choose to follow on social media. Obviously, you and I probably both follow people that are a little bit, they do the work and they kind of stay up on this a little bit more. But I'll give you some credit for this too. I think your influence is spreading, because when the Blake Snell trade was made, there was some typical reaction from Mariner fans that you see right off the bat. Why couldn't we do that? So many people jumped into my timeline on those reactions with, well, here's the equivalent of what that trade would have looked like if you sub in our similarly ranked prospects. Would you have wanted to do that? It was
Right.
almost as if they were speaking for you and spreading the gospel of
And I'm not
baseball
the
for
only
you.
one. I appreciate that, and I've been preaching that for a while, but I'm certainly not the only one. I think Ryan Divish wrote a story at the Times talking about, and he threw out what
Yeah.
he thought the
Yeah,
equivalent
Ryan
was.
does a great job.
While it was different than mine, still prohibitive. It's difficult. What Seattle's trying to do is they want a window that's sustainable. They don't want a 2 or
Mhm.
a 3 year window. They want a 5, 6, 7, 8 year window. And every time you spin, and the analogy I used the other day, a little Friends reference, I said it's kind of like um, stealing from Chandler, Monica, and Ross, and to pay Joey. Well, the groups, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's you, and more literally and more specifically, you're stealing from 2023 through 2028 to pay 2021 and 2022.
Yeah.
Why would you do that? It's like 5 years for two. If you think about it from directly from a trade standpoint, it's it's 24 plus years. It's probably more like 26, 27 years of control over four players for 3 years of control for one. That's the deal that the San Diego Padres made for Blake Snell. But another thing that I try to preach a lot, try to remind myself of too, is buying wins is expensive. It's just
Mhm.
not time for Seattle to chase victories, to chase
Yeah.
one, two, because like look realistically, Dan, like how many wins is Blake Snell himself, Blake Snell, the pitcher, going to add to the Padres total? He's what, at most he's a 4.5 win pitcher.
Yeah.
5 if he does better, if he performs better than his Cy Young year in 2018. So you just bought 5 wins for 27 years worth of club control. Like
Yeah.
that's a pretty darn steep price. That's one of the steeper prices that you'll see. And what they sent the Rays, like Patino,
Yeah.
excuse me, Patino. Luis Patino is probably better than any Mariners pitching prospect right now. I would say it's pretty clear. I think others would say it's closer. I think it's pretty clear. And he's ready to go from day one, and he helps the Rays. Like that is just a deal that Seattle couldn't make at this point.
Yeah.
It's just not ready to do that in trade, in free agency, and the way they handle the roster, the way they handle their prospects. It's just not there. But we're so close, man. We're so close. I think
I know.
if we woke up on August 1st and you called me up and said, Church, I know you've been hibernating for the last 6 months, but let me catch you up and tell you what's happened. The Mariners are 500, but they made a deal at the deadline for an impact player that helps them right now and for the next year or two. I would
Yeah.
not be surprised. I would not be surprised.
Nice. Um, Before we talk about your prospect rankings, I I do just wanna say you bring up a good point, because I'm already trying to prepare myself, and I know I'm gonna fail miserably at this, that that day is coming where we get to dip into our stockpile of prospects and make a trade where 2 or 3 really significant young kids goes away to bring in an impact player. I've become so attached to all these prospects now, and you've been dealing with this for over a decade, that's gonna be a hard day, even though it'll be an exciting day on one hand, but, like, I wanna see all these kids blossom and become Mariners. The reality is they're not going to. Some of these will become assets to
Mhm.
acquire other players, and, I'm just trying to get myself ready for that
Hurt,
day.
right? It's gonna hurt. It's gonna
Yeah,
hurt. That's a phrase we hear. Hey, if you wanna go trade for, Jack Flaherty, who's the guy I want the Mariners to go trade for, it's gonna hurt. It's gonna cost you
yeah.
2, 3, 4 players you'd rather not trade. A George Kirby or an Emerson Hancock or Logan Gilbert or
Stop it. Just stop.
it's gonna hurt. Noel Marte, it's going
I
to
don't wanna go
hurt.
there yet.
Yeah, but you know what? I do think that Jerry Dipoto's going to maintain this this approach to his roster and to keeping the winning window open. Um, I don't want to use conservatively because I think he's going to be aggressive, but I don't think he's going to be relatively aggressive with the farm system. Are they going to make trades where it costs them a prospect or two you'd rather not? Yes, but I don't think they're going to do what the Padres have done the last 2 years. I don't think the Mariners are ever going to do that. I
Yeah.
really don't. I think, you might see them splurge a little bit on July 31st. Hey, this is a 95 win team. We have a chance to win the World Series. Let's make the best of it. But I don't think going into a winter, doing what the Padres have just done, considering what they did at the deadline last year, specifically the Austin. I don't see Jerry Dipoto doing that. I don't think it'll be necessary. I think what Seattle right now, everybody wants to compare the Mariners and the Padres because of their recent activity,
Yeah.
their their they're joined down there in Peoria. They share a complex. Um, and they're a young team that's been rebuilding, but they've been rebuilding since 2014, since after the 2014 season, and Preller took over. I think I think a year before Dipoto did. So he's basically been rebuilding the whole entire time that Depoto's been there, and they're only like a year, maybe a year and a half ahead of them. So I think if you want to look at this from that standpoint, Padres versus Mariners, one thing that I think it's very clear the Mariners are better at doing. It's identifying the players once they get into the upper minors that are ready for the big leagues and helping them once they get to the big league level. I think Seattle is better at that than the San Diego Padres are. And that's one of the reasons why the Padres have had to go out and do the Manny Machado and had to go out and do the Eric Hosmer and had to go out and make the Mike Clevenger trade and had to go out and make the Austin Nola trade and had to go out and make now the Yu Darvish and Blake Snell trade because even though they've had very good farm systems, and this is another thing that I continue to preach, farm system rankings don't matter.
Yeah.
It's how many of these players can you turn into impact major leaguers? You can have the best farm system in the world, and the Padres have. They've had the number one and the number two farm system 4 times since the end of the 2013 season,
Yeah.
and it hasn't done anything for them. So now doing it organically hasn't worked for them. So now what Preller's doing is here's the other way I can use my farm system. And I'm not
Mhm.
saying he's doing a bad job because I think it's
We'll
the right
see.
once you learn what your strengths are and what you're not necessarily that great at. This is what's going to happen. I think they've built a pretty good roster and they have a shot to compete with the Dodgers now. Seattle's a little bit better. I think they've already proven that they're better at finishing off development. We're seeing that with Kyle Lewis. I think we'll see some of that with Evan White. We're seeing a little bit of that with JP Crawford. I think the biggest sign of that for the Mariners is Justice Sheffield because
Yeah.
last year and in his short stint with the Yankees, he looked entirely different from when he looked
Yeah.
his best at the minor league level. And Seattle's remade him, and that's really impressive. And Seattle can continue to do that with some of their other arms that are going to be in a good. Look, Nick Margavicius is another one.
Yeah.
Margavicius was waived, like San Diego gave him away, and all of
Yep.
a sudden he's throwing 3 or 4 miles an hour harder, and everything is sharper. Like Seattle's doing something right. So if you're looking for kind of a silver lining in comparison to the Padres, Seattle's better at finishing off talent at the big league level. I think we're going to see more of that in 2021.
I want to talk about some prospects because this is your wheelhouse. This is your foundation. This is how I discovered you years ago at prospectinsider.com. You love talking prospects. In fact, you spend much more time researching and discussing prospects than you do the 25-man, 26-man roster at the major league level. So looking at your most recent top 20, you've got everybody wants to talk about Jared Kelenic, Julio Rodriguez. You've got Kelenic 1, Rodriguez 2. What separates the 2?
Hit tool. That's the number one thing that comes up. We're talking about a guy in Jared Kelnick who some scouts tell me that's a 60 hit tool, 65 hit tool.
Wow.
I've been told that some of the others in the industry that rank the Baseball Americas put a 7 on that. Are we talking about a 70 hit tool? Because that's a 320 hitter.
Yeah.
That's one of the better hitters for average in Major League Baseball.
Yeah.
I think it's a 6 hit tool, and there's still power there. There's still 60 power there as well. And Jared Kelnick is a better athlete. He's faster. He's better defensively. The instincts are better. He can play center field. He's going to end up playing left field for Seattle. Those are the two advantages they have. And one thing with the hit tool, when you're comparing hit tool versus power, power is reliant very largely on the hit tool. So when you see a guy who, like a Julio Rodriguez, who might have 70 power, but the hit tool, I don't want to say he doesn't have a good enough hit tool. He's got a little ways to go, and he's a little further away from the big leagues, and that's another factor in why I have Kelnick. Kelnick's going to see the big leagues in 2021. I don't think there's any chance Julio Rodriguez does. There's some work to do there. But the power is relying on the hit tool. Hit tool's not relying on power. It's a much easier tool to project to the big leagues. And while we didn't see Kelnick above A ball all that much, some a little bit in Double A, you can tell by the way the Mariners are handling him, the work he's done at the alternate site, the alternate training site last year, and how they're, I don't want to say marketing him, but like making sure that we notice that they notice, their
Okay.
PR group, that sort of thing. They know he's going to make his debut early in 2021. And there's a lot of value. There's a lot of prospect value in your expected time of arrival. And for me, it's a clear difference. Like ultimately Kelnick might be a 57 and Rodriguez might be a 56, but that difference in overall future value is clear. It's very, very clear, even though the players might end up being similarly valuable in a couple of years.
To play fantasy baseball for just a minute, let's say it's 2023. You have an outfield of Kyle Lewis, Julio Rodriguez, and Jared Kelnick. Who's playing where?
Rodriguez definitely in a right. He's got a 65 or 70 arm, and it's as accurate as it is strong. I literally just wrote that last night in my notes. He's done a lot of good work there. So Rodriguez in right. And while I think Kelnick is a better center fielder than Lewis, I think the one thing Seattle sees is that Lewis is comfortable and better in center than he is in a corner. And they like the alignment of Kyle Lewis in center and Jared Kelnick in left versus Kyle Lewis in left or right field and Jared Kelnick in center, because Kyle Lewis's second best position is right field. So think about what that would create. If Kyle Lewis had to play right field, you'd have Kelnick in center, Lewis in right, and then you'd have Julio Rodriguez playing in his second best spot.
Yeah.
So you'd have two players playing in their second best spots and only one playing in his best spot. I think with Lewis in center and Kelnick in left and Julio in right, you have two and a half best spots being taken, and they're just more comfortable. Lewis is more comfortable. He makes fewer mistakes, on fly balls, on liners when he's playing center field. And I think they're trying to eliminate, some of the negative plays that happen over the course of a long season or multiple seasons. And the best alignment is for Kelnick to play left and for Kyle Lewis to play center. And you know this as well as anybody, left field is large at Safeco. It's not as large as it used to be, back 10 years ago. But it's large, and you need a good, solid left fielder who can track it down, who has a decent enough arm. And you're looking at a guy with, above average to plus range and above average to plus arm, and Kelnick slated to play over there for the next 6 years.
I do think it was one of the real underrated aspects of Kyle Lewis's performance in 2020. Everybody focused on the bat. He won Rookie of the Year, but showing he can legitimately man center field every day was one of the bright spots of the season for me.
It was, and we saw how, when we talk about comfort, Kyle Lewis doesn't make that play to rob the grand slam against the A's. Doesn't make that play if he's playing left field. And I don't mean he doesn't get to that ball. I mean, if the ball is hit to left field, Kyle Lewis doesn't make the same play if everything else is equal, because he's not as comfortable there. He's just used to seeing the ball off the bat. And that's a legitimate thing. And some guys, like, they get enough experience in left and or right field that it ultimately ends up not mattering. And if you really needed Kyle Lewis to play a corner, because ultimately you will, because he's probably going to play center for what, 2, 3, 4, 5 years and then get moved to a corner, then you just make it work and you put that in. But what the Mariners are trying to do is kind of the path of least resistance, and that's with Kyle Lewis in center field. But that him robbing that grand slam showed how comfortable he is, the route, the jump, the leap at the wall. He was comfortable out there. And obviously
Yeah.
having experience at that particular ballpark helps. But and Lewis being ahead of Kelnick too actually probably comes into play as well. Lewis now understands what it takes to play center field at Safeco Field. Kelnick would be starting over. So I get it. Well, I think Kelnick is a half grade better than Lewis, if not a full grade better in center field. The alignment makes a lot more sense putting Kelnick in left and Kyle Lewis in center. So that's gonna be it's gonna be a fun outfit. We are gonna get some of that. I know we talk about it, and I remind folks, hey, not all these prospects are gonna work out, but one thing is
Right.
for sure, we're going to see, barring significant injuries, knock on wood,
Yeah.
we're going to see an outfield alignment of Kelnick, Lewis, and Rodriguez. If they fail as prospects, they're going to do it at the major league level. They're already too far and too deep into their development to think that those three aren't going to get significant time together in the outfield.
Now, moving down your top 20 slightly, it's interesting how you've grouped the next three. They're all the top starting pitching prospects. Emerson
Which list are
Hancock,
you looking at, by the way? Can I?
the latest live one. Am I
Okay.
looking at the
Okay.
wrong
Cool.
version?
Cool.
I got
Yes.
I got Hancock, Gilbert, Kirby are the
Cool.
next three.
Yep. Yep.
Is by placing Hancock 1, and it's funny, Baseball America came out with their updated Mariners top 20 this week too, and when you read the scouting reports of Hancock, Gilbert, Kirby, they all say projects as a mid-rotation starter with upside for more. They're very similar scouting reports from BA. By having Hancock 3 over Gilbert, who's closer, and Kirby, is that an indication from you that you think he has the best chance to get close or closer to being an ace?
I do. When I look at, and really that is the difference, because Logan Gilbert, when you're comparing Gilbert and Hancock, Gilbert has an advantage in ETA. He has an advantage in polish, which comes with having more experience, both at the college level and in pro ball. Obviously, Hancock hasn't thrown a pro pitch yet. But when you look at the upside, we're talking about a fastball that's 93 to 98, and it's an easier mid 90s fastball. Emerson Hancock can cruise at 94, 95. When you look at Gilbert's more comfortable 92 to 94, and then reaching back for 95, 96, and maybe even occasionally 97. Now, the one thing Gilbert has an advantage over Hancock with when we're talking about the fastball is his better life in the zone. So you're going to see, and I remember this question from years ago, why does one guy that throws 98 get fewer swings and misses on his fastball than a guy that throws 92? Well, it's the life. It's sometimes it's command. And that's really the difference between the two fastballs right now. But Hancock has time to learn to pitch more effectively up in the zone, to maybe alter the grip on his fastball a little bit. Maybe starts throwing, a more pure two-seamer. But he works better down in the zone, doesn't get as many swings and misses. But that velocity still gives him an opportunity to set up everything else he has. And I do think he has a better set of secondary pitches. Logan Gilbert, the slider is above average to plus, the curveball is above average. The changeup has been average-ish. We haven't seen a whole lot of that average changeup in the minors.
Okay.
That's Hancock's best secondary, is his changeup. So there are some advantages there that Hancock has. And I think athletically, when you project a pitcher athletically, you see more room for physical projection from Hancock, because while Gilbert is a big guy, 6'4", 6'5", 230 pounds, Hancock's more athletic. There's typically more you can do with a player's delivery to salvage or improve command and control, to develop pitches when he's also athletic. I just like the profile of Hancock a little bit better. It's really close. And if you want to tell me, hey, Gilbert's, the better prospect, I'm not really going to argue with you that much. I just happen to disagree just enough to actually switch those up. We're going to see both of them soon. Obviously, Gilbert first, but Hancock's only going to need, 25 to 35 minor league starts to be ready.
And then working down the list, number 6, I've got Taylor Trammell, acquired from the Padres in that trade last year. Cal Raleigh, the catcher, at 7. And then 2 starting pitcher candidates, both drafted in 2019, pretty close to each other, actually, in Brandon Williamson and I didn't write the first names here, and I'm totally blanking out. Isaiah Campbell. Isaiah Campbell wasn't part of the extended roster this year. We didn't get to see him pitch at all in 2020. Haven't seen him pitch since he was drafted, because he had made the deep run in the College World Series. Were you surprised? Is there a reason? Is there any insight you have as to why they shut him down, didn't have him pitch in 2020?
This is just my kind of hypothesis. When you consider who else was at the alternate training site, it tells me that there was something going on physically with Isaiah Campbell when camp kind of reopened and that they weren't going to be able to make significant changes. That's it.
Okay.
Okay, you're not ready to roll right now, so we're going to
Yeah.
leave you off it, and we'll come up with a program for you, and we'll come back next spring training, and hopefully you're ready to go. I don't know that. I don't know that was the
Yeah.
case. That would be my best guess. Campbell's a 4-pitch guy.
Yeah.
Williamson's a 4-pitch guy, and I know one thing that the Mariners are excited about with Williamson is the development of his curveball. That's
Mm.
his best secondary now, and it looks like one of the better curveballs in the organization. And you know how much I love left-handed curveballs. Left-handed
Right.
curveballs are the prettiest thing since Will Clark and Ken Griffey Jr. hitting home runs in the 90s. Yeah, Williamson a little bit, and I've actually updated a little bit the rankings since I think you last saw it,
Okay.
just a little bit. So I actually have Williamson ahead of Campbell now, and I have Williamson ahead of just behind Cal Raleigh right now, and I'm considering moving him ahead of Cal Raleigh as well.
Okay.
It's been difficult to get information because
Right.
we scout, we didn't get to watch, so I'm trying to pay attention to the Dominican Winter Leagues. I'm trying to pay attention to how teams talk about their players and things like that. Try to gather information, but I mean, I know some of the guys on the development staff of the Mariners, and while they don't talk, they say things without saying things sometimes. It's a great group of guys. This is the best development staff the Mariners have ever had, and I believe in them. And when you see a guy take a step up, when you see Williamson do what he's done, when you see Mark Gavicius do what he's done, when you see Justice Sheffield do what he's done, it gives you a lot more confidence in the farm system. But yeah, Williamson's a guy. I wrote. I'll read you a little thing. If there's a starter in the system with kind of impact helium entering 2021, it's Williamson. I think
Okay.
it's hands down. Everybody wants to talk about Juantane. Everybody wants to talk about Isaiah Campbell, and certainly Brandon Williamson's part of that. But I think it's clear that Williamson is the guy when you're looking about who could take a big step forward and kind of have a loud season in terms
Yeah.
of prospect status and development. Williamson's the guy. It's a 6'5", 6'6" guy, can throw downhill. Very consistent with his fastball command. We've seen him up to 97 in short stints, but he's mostly low 90s. I'd like to see where he's at right now because
Yeah.
with how Seattle's been able to improve arm strength and sustainable arm strength, who knows, maybe he can sit 93, 94 and throw that curveball and slider and changeup and throw downhill. That's a starter for me. So I'm excited to see where Williamson goes in 2021, and hopefully we get a chance to see him, not just on minor league baseball television, but I'm hoping the second half of the season we get an opportunity to go see guys like that in person.
I'm confident. I'm optimistic we will. And you're tugging at my heartstrings there, talking about lefty curveballs.
Oh,
Grew up. Now I've got visions of Mark Langston dancing in my head. Grew up on a lot of those hammers from Langston. You mentioned him, and you mentioned him by name just a second ago, and you mentioned him earlier in this interview, not by name, but I think I know you were referring to him. At number 10, you have Juantane, and it's really a shame that his name isn't pronounced 10 because that would just be
right.
serendipitous. But
I've heard so many different pronunciations of his name. I counted 11 different ones on the streams in 2019 after the trade with the Yankees. I counted 11 different ones, and there were broadcasters that were pronouncing it differently in the game. They'd call him Fen and then Thane and then 10, in the same broadcast because people just weren't sure. So
well, it was my favorite part of your scouting report that you talked at length. You didn't just say, "Hey, here's how it's pronounced," but you gave background and everything else on that it is Juantane.
Right. If you know anything about the Spanish language, you know that they don't pronounce their E's the way that the English language pronounces their E's. So how can it be 10? Right. And how
Or
can it be
10.
10? Because that's what we thought it was. Forever we thought it was 10, but it's 10. Yeah.
Then just would have made it really, really difficult to talk about his outings, and it just would have been
Or fun.
yeah.
Difficult.
But I want to talk about him because, he was an interesting prospect anyway when the Mariners reacquired him from the Yankees a year ago. But now he's even more interesting because he's gotten older. I think he was 19 when they reacquired him. He's filled out his body a little bit more, and he was up to 99 this last year. And when you mentioned earlier there are a couple guys in the system that could be on the Edwin Diaz path, he was one of them, right?
He's number one on that list. It used to be Justin Dunn, but I'm worried about the Justin Dunn fastball. Yeah. Is absolutely. I think he's actually on that path. Will they give him a chance to start? perhaps, but it might just be more about him developing and continuing to mature than where they kind of see him long term. When you think about what the Mariners could have in their bullpen, you could have whatever they have now that they carry forward, obviously. You could have Isaiah Campbell, who's a 4-pitch guy, and in short stints up to 97, 98. You could have Juantane, who's, like you said, up to 99 with an improved slider, and he has a third pitch and a changeup. You could also add to that, maybe Joey Gerber gets back to where he was a couple of years ago and is 93 to 97 with an above average slider. You could have Yohan Ramirez, who the stuff is nasty. If they could figure out a way for him to throw a lot of strikes, they're in business there as well. But Anthony Mashevitz, we saw what he could do last year. But you can also look at a guy like Levi Stout, who's a 4-pitch guy and was a starter in college at Lehigh. And he could be the third guy from Lehigh, the third player from Lehigh to debut at the big league level. We haven't seen him throw a pitch because he had TJ surgery right after the draft. But this is also a guy who's comfortably 92 to 95 as a starter, but in short stints, 97, 98, 99. Now, something that Stout and Tane have in common is how they're built. Now, again, this is 2021. We don't look at pitchers and go, oh, he's only 6 feet and 195 pounds. He has to go to the bullpen. We see what Marco Gonzalez is doing. We see what Marcus Stroman is doing. Trevor Bauer is not that big. We see guys. But there are some similarities there. So, it's a quicker way to extract value out of them, and that's what they did with Diaz. 2, it's probably the safest bet for them long-term anyway in terms of future role. And both of them could end up skating through the minors. If you throw Juantane and Levi Stout in the bullpen from the get-go in 2021, and they're healthy and there are no health hurdles along the way, they're probably in the big leagues in September of 2022, if not before.
Yeah.
I mean, you can slide. I mean, you throw a 99 in A-ball, nobody's hitting you. You won't even need your slider. Nobody is hitting you if you're throwing 99 in A-ball. So if they're at Modesto and then they move up, we might even see start the year in Double A, again, depending on the role. But Stout and Tane are the two that stand out. And Wyatt Mills is another one that we've talked about, and his velocity was up over the fall as well. And he was a player that didn't get to compete at the alternate training site, but they had a plan for him. It's starting to work out. And if they can sustain some of the higher end velocity, like Juantane's not going to sit 99 necessarily. Stout's not going to sit 99. But if you're 95 plus and you have secondaries and you can get up to 99, man, I mean, this whole idea, remember Jerry Dipoto said, hey, we might start thinking about, some starting pitchers and turning them into relievers. We think there might be some value there. Everybody thought they were talking about Kendall Graveman or maybe a Desclafani, who was a free agent, ended up signing with the Giants. A Garrett Richards, who would be my dream guy. Turn this starter into reliever. Garrett Richards can close for you, immediately and probably be pretty good and stay healthy. Maybe they were talking about Levi Stout and Juantane. Maybe it wasn't necessarily about 2021, but maybe those were the guys they were talking about.
Well, and if Levi Stout can be 95 to 99, Baseball America gave him their award as best changeup in the system as well. That sounds like a pretty nasty combination for sure.
I think that's fair. Absolutely. I give it to Emerson Hancock, but I think that's fair. I think it's Stouts is right. It's at least a 60 pitch.
And you didn't even mention just one more bullpen piece talking about Andres Munoz, who still has prospect status. I was surprised by that because I know he's had some big league time before he hurt his arm, but they're optimistic now that he might be back on a mound pitching full time. Scott Service said recently might be back by June or July. That's another guy to throw in the future closer mix too, right?
It absolutely is, and he might have the most upside of all of those names that we just talked about. We're talking about a guy who, pre-injury touched 102, 103, 104. I mean, that's just crazy. Yeah. I mean, that's obviously a Aroldis Chapman, peak Aroldis Chapman territory. The slider's pretty decent. It's he's done some things to it. It was more cutter-like in the minors. On his way to the big leagues and in the big leagues, it's turned into more of a true slider. So there's certainly some promise there. I have him ranked 18th, and only because he's coming off Tommy John surgery. And there's always some unknowns there. There are no automatics. We've come a long way with Tommy John surgery, of course, Dan, but you just really never know how some guys are gonna come. Look how long Sam Carlson's been battling to come back. So, and obviously in 2020, he didn't get to pitch because of the pandemic canceling the minor league season, but he didn't even pitch in 2019. I mean, this is a guy who Carlson drafted in 17, had Tommy John in 18, and didn't even come back and pitch in 19. So maybe things are going great for Munoz, and if he comes back in June, awesome. If you told me that Munoz was exactly who he is, but didn't have the Tommy John surgery, he would be probably my 10th, 11th, 12th ranked prospect. He's still a reliever, so he probably can't really be higher than that, at least for
Yeah.
me, because I'm looking at the upside there. But a guy that's ready, stuff wise, to come up and throw the ball, through the catcher's glove, essentially. Yeah, the Mariners are building a bullpen, and there are going to be some organic opportunities for them to do that in the coming years without having to spend money. I mean, there's an Edwin Diaz path for Tane and Levi Stout, and it'd be interesting to kind of see how they handle those two in 2021.
Well, and let's be honest, when talking about Munoz, if he had been healthy, never had TJ, wouldn't have been in that trade. I think that was the most fun part of that trade for me as it was kind of developing that day and names were starting to come out and it was turning into, oh, it's a 3 or it's 4 names. Now we got 5 coming back. I was familiar with Ty France. I was familiar with Taylor Trammell. I had no idea who Andres Munoz was. And so, it took me 10 seconds to Google him and figure out kind of what his history was.
And he throws 300 miles an hour and he just had Tommy John surgery. Yeah.
That was the cream cheese frosting on top of the red velvet cake. I mean, that was just
I still like to
beautiful
refer to
thing.
that trade as the moment Jerry Dipoto bent AJ Preller over his knee.
To me, you and I started talking about this 2 years ago when I came up to your place and went in your studio and we talked about sort of the first 6 months of the rebuild and how I felt about it, and how I felt it was going. So much of this stuff and so many of these prospects we talked about in the last half hour have been acquired since then. The Padres trade to me was like you took this rebuild to a whole nother level because you have Taylor Trammell ranked 6th. We didn't even talk about him.
Right.
Andres Torrens looked like a starting catcher for us after he was acquired from the Padres and will be in the everyday mix along with Tom Murphy. Ty France might be the everyday designated hitter, might be the everyday second baseman or a guy that moves around and plays 5-6 days a week and might have been our best hitter the last month of the season last year. That was the trade that we didn't see coming, that we still can't believe we got so much for giving up what we gave up and just pile those guys on top of what they had built up over the last 2 years.
And Austin Nola cost the Mariners a nickel.
Nothing.
A nickel. He was a nothing.
Yeah.
People were like,
Yeah.
I don't know if he can catch. We think he'll hit a little bit. He's the former shortstop out of LSU. We think he probably belongs at third base, but we don't see him hitting for power. So we get the catcher thing. We just haven't. And the Mariners were like, no, we think he can catch, and we know he can hit, and we think we can help him. It's just remarkable. And again, this is foresight. This is Jerry Dipoto, his staff, his analysts, and that player development staff helping Austin Nola max out, his value. Again, Jerry Dipoto is making moves at the right time. We talk about, was this a good move? Did they win this trade? Was this a good move? Did they win this? Did it make sense to spend $4 million on this player? But the timing of it comes into play. When they pulled the plug after the 2018 season and traded Zunino and traded Paxton and traded Edwin Diaz and traded Robinson Cano, the timing of it was the key.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with Austin Nola. The timing of it was the key. Yep, Dipoto took Preller to the woodshed on that one. It is about the best way I can put it.
I love it.
And Preller isn't a bad general manager.
Right.
I think he understands, how
he's
to
built a contender.
Yeah, they have a contender now. While it's taken some money, they've built the majority of that, the vast majority of that with trades from their farm system and with players, coming up through their system and producing at the big league level. And to see Jerry Dipoto just spank them like that was fun. That was one of the funnest podcasts I ever recorded was talking about that deal because that was a whooping.
Yeah, that was good times. Speaking of good times, you mentioned it. I believe it's going to happen at some point, assuming that at some point we get to go back to baseball stadiums this year. Give me a quick bet. If you had to put money on it, are you going to see more Rainiers games or more full season advanced A Everett games this year? How great is that?
Boy, that is a good question. That is a good, I don't know. I guess I'll have to see the roster and kind of see how guys progress because I'm always going to see players and not the team. But I could see it being 50-50. I could see it leaning Tacoma heavily. I could see it leaning Everett heavy. If we get to a point where we're allowed back in ballparks in all the leagues, I will be taking a road trip as well over the summer. Nice. So nice. I want to see
those are always fun to hear about when you get back.
Modesto. Yeah, I was planning on doing that again. I did it last year down in Modesto, which was a lot of fun. That's if you're a road trip guy, taking the California trip to see Cal League teams is a blast. And while people don't like the Cal League, it's not a great baseball league. It's not great for the players because some of the towns are run down, the ballparks are run
Yeah,
down.
I've been to Lancaster.
Yeah, from a fan standpoint, it is beautiful. And then on my way back up, I chased Everett a couple of times, Vancouver and Tri
Yeah.
City, and got to see George Kirby and guys like that. So that was a lot of fun. And then last year I was planning on doing that again and didn't get to. So if that opens up in time for me to plan that out, I'll definitely be doing that. But locally, yeah, it really just depends. It depends. I don't believe we're gonna have fans in the stands the first half of the season though, at the major league level or the
Yeah.
minor league level. And I think there's gonna be a bigger squeeze on having fans in the stands at the minor league level. I do think we're gonna see some fans in the stands at the major league level for all 30 major league clubs before the end of the season, but I do think it's gonna be July, August, September rather than that first part of the season. The minor leagues, I'm not nearly as confident in because the upside and the downside don't match up to the same
Yeah.
thing at the big league level. So I'm not sure they're going to push it. But if I do get that opportunity, I'm going to do it.
Well, listen, man, it was great having you back. It was great catching up. We talked for half an hour, 40 minutes before I even hit record today. And I just knew that I wanted to have you as my first guest on the Emerald City Sportscast. And thanks for stopping by, man. And we'll have to have you back again once spring training fires up and we have some real baseball to talk about.
Anytime, man. Appreciate it. I do want my trophy, even if it's just on a poster. I want my honorary trophy in some way. Even if I have to pay for it, I will pay for it. It's like a championship belt for me. The first guest on your show, I want it. I'll put it in my background for my Zoom calls and my Google Meets. Absolutely. So good luck with this. Appreciate it. And anytime you want to talk some baseball, let's do it.
All right, man. Thanks. Jason Churchill. You can read his stuff at prospectinsider.com. You can listen to him on the Baseball Things podcast. It'll cost you, but it's really affordable and it's well worth it. Great baseball content. If you love discussing and hearing about the Mariners minor league system and what happens behind the scenes in player development, that's the place to go. The Baseball Things podcast. Jason Churchill. Thanks again. We'll talk to you soon, man.
Thanks.